A waitress's kindness caught the eye of a billionaire, and it changed her life in unimaginable ways. In the heart of Boston, where the hum of city life often drowns out whispers of compassion, a small, unassuming diner named Harbor's End sits quietly on a forgotten corner. Its cracked windows and flickering sign mirror the struggles of its patrons, many of whom are just trying to make it through another day. Amid the coffee cup clatter and grilled sandwiches aroma, one woman stands out, not for her appearance, but for the warmth she brings to those around her. Sophia Reynolds, a 26-year-old waitress, seems like any other hardworking woman. But beneath the surface of her modest life lies an extraordinary heart that beats with an unwavering determination to spread kindness in a world that often feels indifferent. To her, the long hours and meager pay are simply a backdrop to the quiet joy she finds in helping others. Each night after her shift, Sophia gathers leftover food and walks the cold streets of the city, offering a meal and a kind word to those society has long forgotten. Sophia doesn't know that one small act of compassion, a simple decision to help a shivering boy on a stormy night, will set into motion events that will change her life forever. Unbeknownst to her, a stranger is watching, someone whose life has been defined by wealth and power, but is now searching for something money cannot buy. As their worlds collide, Sophia's seemingly ordinary life takes a turn she could never have imagined, revealing the profound impact of kindness and the extraordinary power of selflessness. What happens when the simplicity of a kind heart meets the resources of a billionaire seeking meaning? And how can one small act create ripples of change that touch countless lives? This is a story of transformation, courage, and a connection forged through compassion. Rachel Hayes had an extraordinary ability to see beyond appearances. To her, every customer was more than just an order. They were a story waiting to be heard. Whether it was a hurried businessman who barely looked up from his phone or an older woman clutching her coffee like a lifeline, Rachel made them feel noticed. She greeted each one with a smile, her words tinged with genuine warmth, even as her struggles loomed in the background. Her shift often ended after dark, leaving Rachel to walk home through dimly lit streets. But instead of hurrying past the homeless individuals gathered under the bridge, she stopped to share what she could. Armed with leftover sandwiches and steaming cups of soup tucked into a worn tote bag, she approached each person with a soft greeting. These nightly rituals were a balm for her soul, a way to give back, even when she had little to spare. One freezing December evening, Rachel noticed a boy no older than 10 huddled on a bench near the bus stop. His thin coat hung limply on his small frame, and his face was streaked with tears. Rachel's heart ached as she crouched down to meet his gaze. "Hi there, sweetheart," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Liam," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Are you here alone, Liam? Where's your family?" she asked gently. The boy shook his head, his eyes brimming with fear. "I don't have anyone." Rachel's chest tightened as she reached for his icy hands. "Come with me," she said, her voice firm but kind. Together, they walked back to Sunrise Corner. Rachel wrapped him in a warm blanket, brought him a bowl of her homemade chicken noodle soup, and watched as his slight frame slowly relaxed under the cafe's comforting glow. Rachel didn't realize that across the street, a figure sat in a sleek black car, silently observing every moment of her selflessness. Jonathan Grant watched Rachel with growing fascination in the back seat of his luxury sedan. As the CEO of Grant Global Ventures, Jonathan was accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. His world was polished, fast-paced, and indifferent. Yet, in this small, unassuming woman, he saw something he had long forgotten, a purity of purpose that transcended wealth and ambition. Jonathan had arrived at the diner on business, intending to meet a local contractor. But as he waited for his meeting, he saw Rachel take the boy inside. Her actions, so simple yet profoundly genuine, stirred something within him. For years, Jonathan had lived a life measured by financial success, but Rachel's compassion reminded him of the humanity he had left behind in pursuit of power. "Who is she?" Jonathan murmured, more to himself than his driver. The driver, a man in his early 60s who had worked for Jonathan's family for decades, glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "She looks like someone who cares, sir." "That's rare these days." Jonathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the diner's window. Rachel crept, tending to the boy as though he were the most critical person in the world. It starkly contrasted the cold efficiency Jonathan had come to expect from the people in his orbit. He was intrigued, not just by her actions but by the authenticity that radiated from her every movement. When his meeting concluded, Jonathan sat in the car, lost in thought. The boy's smile as he ate his soup lingered in his mind, as did Rachel's quiet determination. She didn't know she was being watched and wasn't acting for recognition. There was something about her, a strength wrapped in kindness, that Jonathan couldn't ignore. He decided then and there that he needed to know more about Rachel Hayes, not as a businessman or a philanthropist but as a man searching for a connection to something real. WHE didn't realize that this decision would change both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The next evening, Jonathan Grant returned to Sunrise Corner. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside, drawing Rachel's attention. She glanced up from the counter where she was pouring coffee and offered him the same welcoming smile she gave every customer. "Good evening. Welcome to Sunrise Corner," she said, her voice warming the room's edges. Jonathan nodded, his sharp suit and polished demeanor an unusual sight in the humble diner. "Good evening," he replied, his voice calm but purposeful. He scanned the space briefly before choosing a booth near the window, positioning himself where he could observe Rachel as she worked. Rachel approached with her notepad, her gaze flickering with curiosity. There was something different about this man, though she couldn't place it. "What can I get for you?" she asked, pen poised. Jonathan looked up, meeting her eyes. "The special of the day," he said simply, though his tone carried an air of deliberation. Rachel nodded and offered a polite smile. "Coming right up." Jonathan watched intently as Rachel moved through the diner, balancing trays and chatting with regulars. He wasn't just observing her movements, he was studying her interactions. There was a distinct genuineness in how she spoke to each person, a warmth that made even the gruffest patrons soften under her care. She set the plate down with practiced ease when she brought his meal. "Enjoy," she said with a smile before turning to leave. "Wait," Jonathan said, his voice stopping her mid-step. Rachel turned, her expression polite but cautious. "I couldn't help but notice how you helped that boy last night. It was admirable." Rachel blinked, taken aback by his comment. "Oh, that? It was nothing. He needed help, and I was there." Jonathan tilted his head, his gaze steady. "Most people wouldn't have stopped, but you did." Rachel's cheeks flushed slightly, and she shrugged. "I just did what anyone should do." Jonathan's lips curved into a faint smile. "Perhaps, but not everyone would." Though the exchange was brief, it left Rachel unsettled in a way she couldn't quite articulate. Something about the man, his measured words and piercing gaze, made her feel as though he saw more of her than she intended to reveal. Jonathan finished his meal and quietly slipped out of the diner, leaving Rachel to clear the table. As she picked up the plate, her fingers brushed against an envelope tucked neatly beneath it. Frowning, she opened it, only to find a check for $100,000 inside. Her breath hitched as her eyes scanned the crisp handwriting on the accompanying note. "For someone whose kindness has not gone unnoticed. Use this to build the life you dream of." Rachel's hands trembled as she read and reread the words, her heart pounding. She had never seen such a sum of money in her life. The check alone could erase years of financial struggle. But the gesture left her with a swirl of emotions: gratitude, disbelief, and an undercurrent of unease. Who was this man? And why would he offer her something so extraordinary? Her thoughts raced as she walked home that night, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. Could she accept it? Would doing so compromise her sense of self-reliance? These questions lingered in her mind as she lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her small apartment. The next day, Rachel returned to work with the envelope still weighing heavily in her purse. She resolved to keep the gift hidden, not wanting to draw attention to herself or invite questions she wasn't ready to answer. Yet, as she moved through her shift, her eyes darted to the door, half expecting to see the stranger walk in again. Her internal conflict grew as she considered what the money could do. It could pay off the debts that loomed over her, fix the leaky pipes in her apartment, and even help her younger sister pursue her dream of attending art school. But accepting such a gift from someone she barely knew felt like stepping into uncharted territory, making her both vulnerable and hopeful. Unbeknownst to Rachel, Jonathan Grant wasn't done with her yet. For him, this was only the beginning of a connection that would alter the course of their lives forever. Rachel Hayes had always prided herself on her independence, no matter how difficult her life had become. The idea of accepting a gift, let alone one as enormous as $100,000, felt like a betrayal of her principles. As she walked the familiar streets of her neighborhood that evening, the envelope tucked safely into her bag, her mind churned with conflicting thoughts. On one hand, the money could lift her from the cycle of stress and survival that had defined her life for years. She could fix the leaky roof in her apartment, clear her debts, and even start saving for a future she had long since stopped dreaming about. Yet, a nagging voice questioned the motives behind such generosity. Why her? What did this stranger see in her that made him willing to give so much? As the days passed, Rachel tried to go about her routine, but the weight of the decision consumed her. She spent hours poring over the note, reading the words until they felt burned into her memory. Use this to build the life you dream of. What life did she dream of? It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to dream beyond paying rent and keeping the lights on. In quiet moments, Rachel thought about her younger sister, Lily, who had given up her passion for art to work odd jobs and help make ends meet. She thought about the people she passed every night during her walks home, those who had less than even she did. Slowly, she realized that accepting the money might not just change her life. It could create opportunities for others, too. One evening, after closing the diner, Rachel sat alone in one of the booths, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her fingers traced the edges of the crisp paper as she whispered to herself, "Maybe this isn't about me. Maybe it's about what I can do." A week after Jonathan Grant's mysterious appearance at Sunrise Corner, the bell over the door jingled again, and Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she saw him walk in. This time, she didn't hesitate. She approached him directly, her resolve firm but her expression guarded. "You left this," she said, holding out the envelope. Jonathan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I didn't leave it by mistake," he replied, calm but purposeful. Rachel hesitated, her fingers tightening around the envelope. "Why? Why me? You don't even know me." Jonathan gestured toward an empty booth. "May I sit?" After a moment's pause, Rachel nodded, leading him to a corner table. She slid into the seat opposite him, her eyes fixed on his as if trying to decipher the enigma of the man before her. Jonathan leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "I've built a career around making calculated decisions, Rachel," he began. "But watching you that night with the boy wasn't about calculation. It was about instinct. I saw something in you that reminded me of what I've lost touch with over the years." Rachel frowned, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just a waitress," she said quietly. "I don't know what you think you see in me, but I'm no one special." Jonathan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "That's where you're wrong. What you did wasn't just an act of kindness. It reflected who you are. You didn't hesitate. You didn't look for recognition. You simply helped because it was the right thing to do. That kind of selflessness, it's rare." Rachel felt her cheeks flush, her hands curling into fists on the table. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, gesturing to the envelope. "It feels too much." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Then don't think of it as a gift. Think of it as an investment. Not just in you but in the lives you'll touch. You can create something extraordinary, Rachel, and I want to help you do that." Rachel stared at him, her thoughts spinning. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, yet the enormity of what he was offering felt almost incomprehensible. "I don't even know where to start," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Jonathan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out another envelope. "This might help," he said, sliding it across the table. It's the deed to a small cafe downtown. It needs work, but you'll find it has potential, just like you. Rachel's breath caught as she stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. The possibilities that had once felt so far out of reach now loomed large before her, both thrilling and terrifying. Jonathan's voice softened as he rose from the table. You don't have to decide right now, but whatever you choose, know this. The world needs more people like you, Rachel. People who care. Don't let fear hold you back. As he left the diner, Rachel sat frozen in place, the two envelopes in front of her like the keys to an entirely new life. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what could be. Not just for her, but for the community she had always yearned to serve. Rachel spent the next week pacing her small apartment, the envelopes from Jonathan resting on her kitchen table like a beacon of possibility and uncertainty. She couldn't shake the weight of his words. Don't let fear hold you back. The deed to the cafe felt like a key to a door she hadn't dared to dream existed. But the doubts crept in at every corner. Could she rake such a leap? What if she failed? Finally, one sleepless night, Rachel made her decision. She would take the chance, not for herself, but for the people who needed a space where kindness wasn't a rarity but the foundation. Armed with the deed and Jonathan's faith in her, she visited the rundown cafe on the edge of downtown. The building was tired, with cracked windows and peeling paint, but Rachel saw past its flaws. She envisioned a warm, welcoming space, a haven for those seeking more than just a cup of coffee. The transformation of the cafe was no small feat. Rachel threw herself into the project, investing every ounce of energy into its revival. Friends and regulars from Sunrise Corner volunteered their time, painting walls, refurbishing furniture, and hanging lights that cast a golden glow. A local artist painted a mural on one wall, an intricate depiction of people from all walks of life, bound together by shared stories and laughter. When the cafe finally opened, Rachel named it Rachel's Haven. The first day was a flurry of activity. Customers came in not just for food or coffee, but for the sense of belonging that Rachel had worked so hard to create. Each table carried a small card with the words, "Every act of kindness matters. Let's build something beautiful together." Rachel made it a point to hire staff who needed a fresh start. A single mother, a veteran struggling to reintegrate, and a young man who had aged out of the foster system were among her first hires. She trained them with patience, emphasizing not just the mechanics of the job, but the importance of creating a space where everyone felt valued. The cafe wasn't just a business. It was a community. On Friday nights, local musicians filled the space with live performances. During the day, the cafe hosted workshops, from cooking classes to resume writing, led by volunteers who believed in Rachel's vision. Slowly but surely, Rachel's Haven became more than she had imagined. As Rachel's Haven grew, so did its impact. It became a gathering place for people from every walk of life. On any given day, you could find a retired teacher tutoring children in one corner, a group of friends sharing stories over coffee in another, and a young artist sketching in the glow of the cafe's warm light. The walls, once bare, were now adorned with framed photos and handwritten notes from patrons expressing gratitude for the haven Rachel had built. One afternoon, a young woman named Clara walked into the cafe, clutching a tattered folder. She had heard about Rachel's Haven from a friend and hoped it might be where her dreams could take root. Clara was a budding writer, but years of financial instability had left her confidence in tatters. Rachel sat with her over a steaming mug of tea, listening intently as Clara shared her story. By the end of their conversation, Rachel offered Clara a position at the cafe and encouraged her to use the space to write in her free time. Rachel's philosophy was simple. People thrived when they felt seen and supported. She ensured the cafe was a safe space for everyone, regardless of background. People without homes were welcomed with free meals and warm smiles. Struggling parents found comfort in the toy-filled nook for their children. Rachel's Haven wasn't just a place to eat. It was a place to heal. Jonathan Grant, meanwhile, remained a quiet presence in the background. He visited occasionally, slipping into a corner seat and observing the vibrant life that Rachel had brought to the cafe. During one such visit, He watched as Rachel diffused a tense moment between two patrons with the same calm, empathetic demeanor that had first caught his attention. Jonathan smiled to himself, knowing he had made the right choice to trust her. One evening, as Rachel locked up the cafe after a hectic day, she stepped outside and looked up at the glowing sign above the door. For the first time in years, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment, not just because of what she had built, but because of the community it had nurtured. Standing there, she thought of Jonathan and his simple but profound words, "Don't let fear hold you back." She knew now that it wasn't just about overcoming her fears. It was about giving others the courage to believe in their potential. Rachel's haven had become a reflection of that belief, a place where every act of kindness sparked another, rippling outward in ways she could never have predicted. Months turned into a year, and Rachel's haven thrived beyond her wildest expectations. The cafe had become a beacon of hope, its impact rippling far beyond the neighborhood. Yet, in the quiet moments after the rush of customers subsided, Rachel often thought of Jonathan Grant, the man who had seen potential in her when she couldn't see it in herself. She wondered if he knew just how transformative his support had been, not just for her but for the countless lives touched by the cafe. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and bathed the cafe in a warm, amber glow, the familiar jingle of the bell above the door made Rachel glance up. Her breath caught in her throat when she saw Jonathan standing there, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, his expression softer than she remembered. "Jonathan," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "I didn't expect to see you." He smiled and gestured around the room. "I had to see it for myself," he said. "What you've created here, it's remarkable." Rachel blushed slightly, motioning for him to take a seat. As he settled into one of the booths, his gaze swept across the room. The walls now bore photos of smiling patrons, the mural of intertwined hands symbolizing community, and shelves lined with books and handmade crafts donated by locals. The air buzzed with quiet conversations and the gentle guitar strumming from a musician in the corner. "You've done more than I ever imagined," Jonathan said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "This place isn't just a cafe, it's a sanctuary." Rachel sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. "It's not just me," she said earnestly. "It's the people who come here, the community that's formed. I only planted the seed. You gave me the courage to believe it could grow." Jonathan shook his head, his gaze meeting hers. "I may have provided the tools, Rachel, but you're the one who made this happen. You turned an idea into something tangible, something that changes lives every single day." Their conversation shifted into quieter reflections. Jonathan shared his struggles with finding purpose amidst a life of wealth and power. Rachel listened, realizing for the first time that even those who seemed to have everything could feel lost. In that moment, their connection deepened, not as benefactor and recipient, but as two people bound by a shared understanding of the transformative power of compassion. As Jonathan prepared to leave, he paused at the door, turning back to Rachel. "You've reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that the greatest success isn't in what you achieve for yourself, but in what you inspire in others." The following years saw Rachel's haven expand into something even more significant. With Jonathan's quiet support and the momentum of its growing reputation, Rachel opened additional havens in nearby cities. Each location carried the same warmth and mission: to provide food, dignity, connection, and hope. The cafes became community hubs, offering free meals to people without housing, job training for those seeking employment, and workshops for personal and professional growth. Rachel's vision didn't stop there. Together with Jonathan, she founded the Haven Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding community projects, supporting small businesses, and mentoring young leaders. The foundation's motto, *Kindness ripples outward*, became a rallying cry for change, inspiring people far and wide to contribute in their ways. Rachel's haven grew into a movement, but Rachel herself never lost the humility that had defined her from the beginning. She continued to greet every customer with the same warm smile, to listen intently to the stories of those who walked through her doors, and to remind everyone that kindness wasn't a rarity, it was a choice. Years later, As Rachel stood at the grand opening of the Haven Foundation's new headquarters, surrounded by supporters, volunteers, and friends, she felt profound gratitude. Jonathan stood beside her, his expression filled with pride and quiet reflection. "You've built something extraordinary," he said softly. Rachel turned to him, her eyes glistening with emotion. "We built it," she corrected. "You saw something in me when I didn't. And now, together, we've created something that will outlast us both." Jonathan smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's the beauty of kindness. It doesn't end. It keeps growing, reaching places we can't even imagine." As Rachel looked out at the crowd, she spotted familiar faces. The veteran she had hired in the cafe's early days, now a manager at one of the locations. Clara, whose writing career had blossomed thanks to the encouragement she'd found at Rachel's Haven, and even Liam, the boy who had unknowingly started it all, now a confident teenager volunteering with the foundation. In that moment, Rachel knew her purpose had been fulfilled, not just in the physical spaces she had created, but in the lives she had touched. The ripple of kindness she had started had grown into a wave, with it the hope of a better, more compassionate world. And as the crowd applauded, Rachel allowed herself a quiet smile. Her journey had begun with a single act of compassion, and it had become a legacy that would inspire generations to come.